6 weeks. That's how long I sat across breakfast tables and Sunday phone calls and casual conversations with my son, keeping my face perfectly neutral while quietly moving chess pieces across a board he didn't even know he was sitting at. My attorney, my golf buddy, the only man outside of God who knew what I was about to do, called me 3 times that week alone. "Paul, I'm telling you," his voice dropping like someone might be listening. "This is either the smartest thing you've ever done or the thing that ends your relationship with your son forever. There is no middle ground here." "Ryan," I told him, "there hasn't been a middle ground between me and that boy in 4 years. I'm just the last one to admit it." Ryan Baker does not go quiet often. That told me everything I needed to know about whether I was making the right call. Welcome back to sweet family revenge, where every secret has a price, every betrayal has a consequence, and justice always finds its way home. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and drop a comment below. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button because in this family, you never want to miss what happens next. My name is Paul Herman, and before I tell you what my son did at that dinner table, before I tell you what happened in the 23 hours that followed, I need to tell you about Nora Walker. Because none of this makes sense without Nora. Nora Walker was 67 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, and the most formidable human being I have ever had the privilege of knowing. We met 20 years ago at a business conference in Chicago, where she was the keynote speaker and I was the man in the 3rd row who walked out of that room, understanding money completely differently than he'd walked in. She became my mentor, then my friend, then the person whose opinion I valued above every other living soul. She passed 8 weeks before that dinner. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in October, gone by January. The specific cruelty of a disease that doesn't negotiate. Her last weeks were spent in a hospital bed in her daughter's house in Evanston, and I drove out there every Tuesday until the end. The last coherent conversation we had. She was propped up on 3 pillows with an oxygen tube she kept trying to remove because she found it undignified. And she looked at me with those sharp brown eyes that cancer had done absolutely nothing to dim. "You're going to have to make a decision about Derek soon," she said. "Not the comfortable decision, the real one." "I know," I said. "You've been subsidizing a man instead of raising one," she said. "There's a difference, and he's running out of time to learn it." She was right. She was almost always right. Let me tell you about Derek Herman, my son. 31 years old, 6 feet even, his mother's jaw, my stubbornness worn on the outside like a coat he never takes off, charming when he wants something, difficult when he doesn't get it, the kind of man who walks into a room like he already owns the air in it, and for most of his adult life. He had reason to believe he did, because I had given him that air. I had given Derek a lot of things over 31 years. His college tuition, full ride, no loans, not because he'd earned a scholarship, but because I could write the check, and I did. The Clover Ridge property, a 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood that was appreciating by the minute because he'd mentioned wanting to put down roots. And I'd wanted to help him do it. A car in 2018 co-signed without hesitation. A business venture with a college friend in 2021 that I'd funded to the tune of $22,000 and never mentioned again when it collapsed 6 months later. I had given Derek comfort, what I had not understood, what Nora understood and tried to show me, and what it took until the very end for me to fully accept, was that I had given Derek something more dangerous than money. I had given him the permanent, unquestioned belief that the floor was there, that it would always be there, that someone with my name would always be one phone call away with a safety net regardless of how he behaved or who he became. I had built a man who had never once had to build himself. That was not Derek's failure. That was mine. But the only way out of that inheritance was through it, and he was going to have to walk through it himself. I couldn't carry him across this one. That was the whole point of the dinner. Saturday, April 14th. I had been planning this particular evening for 6 weeks, ever since the phone call that finally tipped everything. Derek had called me on a Wednesday afternoon in March, not to check in, not to talk, but to tell me, in the flat tone of a man reporting a weather forecast, that he needed $40,000 to cover a real estate deal that had gone sideways. No context, no explanation of how he'd gotten there, no acknowledgement that this was the 3rd time in 4 years he'd called me with a number instead of a conversation. Just the number, and the expectation. I told him I'd think about it. Then I called Ryan Baker and told him to pull out the folder. Ryan Baker is the kind of attorney who prepares for things before you know you need them prepared for. He drafted the property reversion clause back in 2019, paragraph 14 of the Clover Ridge Agreement, buried in language that Derek had signed without reading. That allowed Herman Property Group to reclaim the asset under specific conditions. Ryan had suggested it then as a precaution. I'd hoped I'd never need it. I needed it. I also called Nathan Rivera, my neighbor of 12 years and the closest thing I have to a brother who isn't blood, and told him to be available on Sunday. Nathan asked no questions. That is one of Nathan Rivera's great qualities, and I planned the dinner. Derek arrived at 6:30 jacket pressed. Shoes shined, carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost $60, which I noted was $60 of my money in a different form. The evening started well enough. We talked about the Naperville development market. We talked about the Cubs, who were doing the thing they always do in April, which is make you believe before breaking your heart in September. We talked about everything except the $40,000, which sat between us at the table like a guest neither of us wanted to acknowledge. It was over the main course that the conversation shifted. Derek had been circling something all evening. I could see it. The way you can see a man working up to something, testing the temperature of the room before he commits. When he finally spoke, it was with the particular confidence of someone who has decided the answer is already yes. "Dad, about the Clover Ridge situation. What about it?" "I've been thinking. The property is in my name. I should be able to leverage it without going through Herman Property Group for every decision. It's my house." I set down my fork. "Is it?" Something shifted behind his eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm asking a question. Is it your house? My name is on the deed." "Your name is on the deed because I put it there," I said quietly. "The way your name is on the car, the way your name was on the business loan that didn't work out, the way your name would be on $40,000 right now if I'd said yes on Wednesday." Derek put down his fork. "So that's what this is. This is dinner. Derek." "This is a conversation," I said. "The one we should have had 3 years ago." What happened next, I have replayed it more times than I can count. Not because I enjoy it, because I need to understand it. I need to understand how a man gets to a place where his response to hearing the truth about himself is to reach across a dinner table and do what my son did. He leaned forward, and he spit in my face. Not figuratively, not as a metaphor for disrespect, though God knows it was that. 2. He actually physically looked at his father across a dinner table and spit in his face. The room went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator running in the kitchen. Derek stood up, said something. I didn't hear the words. There was a sound in my ears like distance, and walked out of my house. The door didn't slam. That somehow made it worse. He just pulled it closed behind him, ordinary and final, like he was leaving any room. I sat at that table for a long time. I didn't wipe my face immediately. Not because I was too shocked to, but because I wanted to feel it. I wanted to feel exactly what it felt like so that I would not talk myself out of what I was about to do. Then I picked up my phone and called Ryan Baker. "Do it," I said. "Everything. Tonight." He confirmed. "Tonight. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe to Sweet Family Revenge. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you. Genuinely." Sunday, April 15th, 6:47 a.m. I slept better than I had in years. That probably says something about me. I'm not sure it's entirely flattering, but there is a specific peace that comes when you stop waiting for something to happen and start making it happen. I'd been bracing for that dinner for 6 weeks. Now it was done. The table was cleared. The pieces were in motion. I made real coffee, the kind you grind yourself, and stood at my kitchen window watching the Naperville morning do its slow suburban stretch. Sprinklers running, dog walkers, a teenager on a bike who looked personally offended by the existence of hills. Perfectly ordinary Sunday. Perfectly ordinary world. Except somewhere across town. My son was about to wake up to nothing. My phone had 22 notifications. I read exactly one. Ryan Baker, 2:14 a.m. It's done. Property reversion filed. Account suspension processed. He'll wake up to nothing. "You absolutely sure about this?" "Paul," I typed back. Never been more sure of anything. Then I put the phone face down, finished my coffee, and made eggs. I found out later, through my daughter Leah, who found out through a friend of Derek's named Mark Sanchez. Exactly how Sunday morning unfolded. Derek had driven home from my house running entirely on adrenaline and wounded pride. He'd called Mark from the car, spent an hour taking apart my character with the focused energy of a man who cannot afford to examine his own, and gone to bed somewhere around 2 o'clock in the morning, having convinced himself I was the villain in a story he hadn't written yet. Anger is comfortable. Anger doesn't require a mirror. He woke up Sunday at 9, reached for his phone the way all of us do, reflexively, before we're even fully conscious, and opened his banking app. 0. Not low. Not overdrawn. Not some error he could dispute in 20 minutes. 0. A suspended account with a small gray lock icon where his balance used to be, and a customer service number that would tell him exactly nothing useful. He called the bank. They confirmed the account had been flagged and suspended by the primary account holder, and that resolution required direct contact with that party. The primary account holder was me. He didn't call me. Not yet. Pride at that stage is still load-bearing. You can't remove it without the whole structure coming down, and Derek wasn't ready for that. Instead, he called Mark Sanchez, who drove over within the hour, because whatever else Mark is, he shows up. They sat together in the kitchen of the Clover Ridge house, my house, though that reality was still assembling itself in Derek's mind. And Mark pulled up the county property records on his phone. Ryan Baker's filing was right there. Clean, official, unambiguous. Mark called Leah from the driveway while Derek was still inside. "Your brother is just sitting at the kitchen table," Mark told her, voice low, like he was describing something he didn't want to disturb. Not talking, not moving, just sitting. I know that silence. I've seen it once before, in my own father's face the day his business partner cleaned out their joint account and disappeared. It's the silence of a man whose entire floor just became a trap door. The silence of someone doing arithmetic on everything they thought was solid and getting 0 every single time. Derek sat in that kitchen for 2 hours. By noon, he'd called me 4 times. Everyone went to voicemail. Not out of cruelty, or not entirely out of cruelty, but because Nora had been explicit about this specific part. Even from her hospital bed, even when talking cost her breath, she didn't have to spare. Don't rescue them too fast. Paul, the lesson lives in the discomfort. You pull them out early. You pull the lesson out with it. So, I let the calls go. Let him sit with the arithmetic. Nathan Rivera appeared at my door around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, carrying a glass container of tamales and the careful expression of a man who has strong opinions he is actively choosing not to deliver. You eat. He came in without further invitation, heated the tamales like he owned the kitchen, and sat across from me at the same table where, less than 20 hours ago, my son had made the worst decision of his adult life. We ate in comfortable silence for a while. Nathan's tamales are extraordinary. I don't say that lightly. He called me, Nathan said finally, not looking up from his plate. Derek called you, this morning. Asked if I knew what was going on with the property filing, setting down his fork. I told him he needed to have that conversation with his father. What'd he say? Nathan was quiet for a moment, choosing words the way a careful man does. He said you'd never really understood him, that you always had to control everything. A pause, and then, right before he hung up. He said something else. I waited. He said he didn't know where else to go. That one moved through me differently than I expected. I didn't show it. 58 years of practice. But it settled somewhere low and serious. He didn't know where else to go. 31 years old, and the entire architecture of his life had been drawn by someone else's hand. I hadn't just given Derek comfort. I'd given him the dangerous belief that comfort was the default, that the floor was permanent, that the money would always come, that a net with my name on it would always be there, one call away, regardless of how he behaved or who he became. I'd built a man who'd never had to build himself. That wasn't Derek's failure alone. Half of it was mine. But the only way out of that inheritance was through it, and he had to walk through it himself. I couldn't carry him across this one. That was the whole point. I looked at Nathan. She told me this would be the hardest part. He didn't ask who she was. Nathan had met Nora twice at neighborhood dinners and understood immediately what kind of person she was. The kind that leaves a permanent watermark on everyone they meet. Was she right? The arithmetic. The moment a man stops blaming and starts reckoning. Yeah, I said. At 6:23 p.m., exactly 23 hours and 4 minutes after my son had walked out of my house, headlights swept across my front window. I was already at the door. I'd been at the door for 10 minutes if I'm being honest. I pressed record on my phone, slipped it into my breast pocket, and put my hand on the doorknob. Whatever Derek said in the next few minutes would tell me everything Nora had promised it would. It would tell me who my son actually was when the performance was over and the props were gone, and there was nothing left but the man himself. One breath. And I opened the door. If you've been with Sweet Family Revenge for a while and want these stories to keep coming, it truly helps when you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do. But it's what keeps this community alive and these stories flowing. Thank you, for real. My son looked like a man who'd been turned inside out and put back together wrong. Derek Herman, who 2 years ago had walked into a room like he owned the air in it, was standing on my porch in the same jacket he'd worn to dinner the night before. Wrinkled now, carrying 23 hours of humiliation on his face like a second skin. His eyes were red, not crying red, the other kind. The kind that comes from staring at walls and doing arithmetic that never comes out right. I didn't say a word, just looked at him. Dad! His voice cracked on that single syllable. Just that one word, and it was already falling apart. Dad, I need to talk to you. The recorder is running, I thought. Every word. Then talk, I said. He talked for 40 minutes. I'm going to tell you what really happened in those 40 minutes. Not the circling, not the backtracking, not the too near apologies that dissolved into justifications before they could fully form. But what was underneath all of it? Because underneath the fumbling and the pride fighting a losing battle against desperation, the real thing was there. He was scared. Not of me, not of losing the house or the money, though those fears were present. 2. Loud and obvious. He was scared of the specific thing Nora had predicted he'd be scared of when the floor dropped. Himself. Of looking at himself clearly, maybe for the first time, and not recognizing the man looking back. I've been taking from you, Derek said around the 20-minute mark. We were in the living room by then. He was sitting. I was standing. Deliberately. I know that. I've known it for a while, and I kept telling myself it was different because you're my father. Like, that made it okay. Did it? He looked at the floor. No. I let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. Derek, I'm going to show you something. I went to my desk, the old oak one that had been in every office I'd ever owned, bought secondhand in 1993 for $60 and refused to replace on principle, and opened the bottom left drawer, pulled out a folder, thick, tabbed, the kind of documentation that takes intention to assemble, dropped it on the coffee table in front of him. He looked at it without touching it. Open it. He opened it. The first page was a spreadsheet. Clean. Itemized. Going back 11 years. Every deposit. Every gift. Every loan. The Clover Ridge property valued at current market. The car from 2018. The credit card covered twice without a word. The business venture funded to the tune of $22,000 that I'd never once brought up again when it collapsed. The total at the bottom of the page, highlighted in yellow, was $614,200. Derek stared at that number for a long time. I'm not showing you that to humiliate you, I said. I'm showing you because you need to understand the size of what you've been treating like it was nothing. He turned the page. The second document was the property reversion clause. Paragraph 14, drafted by Ryan Baker in 2019, signed by Derek without reading. That had always allowed Herman Property Group to reclaim the asset under specific conditions. His eyes moved across the language the exact moment he understood it had always been there. That this wasn't a reaction. It was a plan. Moved across his face like weather. You set this up? Yes. The dinner. You provoked me. I gave you an opportunity, I said carefully, to show me who you were. You made your own choices. Derek, I didn't spit on anyone. That word landed like I knew it would. He flinched. Good. The third page. He turned it. A letter. 1 page. Single-spaced. Dated 3 weeks before Nora died. Written by Nora Walker. Dictated technically because her hands had given out to her daughter. And signed with the unsteady signature of a woman spending her last reserves of strength on things she'd decided mattered. She'd written it for Derek, specifically. She'd never met him. But she'd heard enough about him over 20 years of mentoring me that she felt she knew him. The letter was 2 paragraphs. The first told him about her own son, a man she'd made the mistake of never testing, never allowing to struggle, never letting fall. A man who at 44 still didn't know who he was because she'd never given him the space to find out. She called it the most expensive mistake of her life. Nora Walker did not use the word expensive lightly. The second paragraph was 3 sentences. Derek, Your father loves you more precisely because he's doing this. Easy love leaves men empty. The hard kind is the only kind worth inheriting. Derek read it twice. He put the folder down, pressed both hands over his face, and sat like that for a long moment. When he dropped his hands, his eyes were wet. Not the wall-staring red from before, the real kind. I'm sorry. No preamble, no qualification chasing behind it, no performance. Just the words, clean and undecorated, landing in the room between us like something that had been waiting a long time to be said. For last night. For the last 4 years. I'm sorry, Dad. I looked at my son for a long time. The recorder was still running in my pocket. I reached in and turned it off. Here is what I did not do. I did not hand him back the house that night. I did not reinstate the account. I did not tell him everything was fine and fold him back into comfort like none of it had happened. That would have been the old pattern, the one that had produced the man who showed up at my door the night before with entitlement dressed up as ambition. Instead, a proposition. The Clover Ridge property stays in Herman Property Group's name for 12 months, I told him. During those 12 months, you'll manage 2 of my smaller units on Birchwood. Tenant calls, maintenance coordination, rent collection. You don't get paid what a property manager gets paid. You get paid what you earn. Ryan Baker will track everything. At the end of 12 months, we sit back down at this table and look at who you've become. Derek was quiet, absorbing it, and the account. The negotiating instinct flickered briefly behind his eyes, the old Derek reaching for leverage, and then it died. He let it die. That, I thought, is new. Okay, he said. Yeah. Okay. Dad. I stood up and extended my hand. Not a hug. We weren't there yet, and pretending we were would have cheapened what was actually happening. A handshake. Firm. The kind that means something. He took it. Mark Sanchez's Phoenix deal collapsed 6 weeks later. Derek heard about it through mutual contacts and told Nathan about it without apparent devastation. The way a man reports weather when he's decided to stop being controlled by it. Derek managed his first tenant dispute on Birchwood in May. A leaky ceiling. A contractor who didn't show. An angry renter named Mrs. Okafor who had opinions she delivered at full volume. He handled it in 2 days. Called me afterward. She's happy, he said. Good. It wasn't that complicated. I just actually showed up. I smiled at that. Didn't tell him I was smiling. June brought a second dispute, resolved in 1 day. July brought a full unit turnover that Derek coordinated himself. Contractors, cleaning crew, new lease, everything. Ryan Baker called me after reviewing the paperwork. Your son, Ryan said. And there was something in his voice I hadn't heard before when he talked about Derek. He's actually pretty good at this. I know, I said. You know. How do you know? Because I was watching for it. By September, Derek had saved enough from his property management earnings to put a down payment on a used truck. His own money, his own decision. Nobody's name on it but his. He called me the day he drove it home. It's a 2019 F-150 South, he said. Got a dent in the passenger door. Does it run? Perfectly. Then it's a good truck. He laughed. Not the performing laugh he'd used at dinners when he was trying to manage me. The real one. The one that sounds like a man comfortable in his own skin. That laugh right there was worth every difficult minute of the preceding 12 months. Saturday, April 14th, 12 months later. The same table, the same kitchen, the same 2 chairs, different men sitting in them. Derek arrived at 6:30, same time as a year ago, but everything else was different. No $60 bottle of wine purchased on borrowed confidence. He brought a 6-pack of decent beer, The kind you bring when you're being yourself, rather than performing a version of yourself. His jacket wasn't pressed. His shoes weren't shined. He looked like a man who'd stopped auditioning for a role he already had. We ate. We talked. We talked about Birchwood. About Meta. Okafor, who had apparently become one of his most reliable tenants after their initial rocky start. About the F-150 with the dented passenger door that he'd now put 40,000 miles on. We talked about the Cubs, who were doing the thing again. We talked about Nora, and I told him things about her I'd never told anyone, and he listened the way a man listens when he understands he's receiving something valuable. Around 8 o'clock, I went to my desk, the old oak one. $60 in 1993. I pulled out a folder, thinner than the one from a year ago. One document. Ryan Baker had drafted it that week. Per my instructions, after reviewing 12 months of Birchwood records and one conversation with Derek that Ryan had specifically requested, and that Derek hadn't known was an evaluation. I put the folder on the table in front of my son. He looked at it. Something cautious moved across his face. "Open it," I said. He opened it. One page. Clean language. The transfer of the Clover Ridge property from Herman Property Group to Derek James Herman. Free and clear. In perpetuity. No conditions. No clauses. No reversions. His name on the deed. This time, because he'd earned it. Derek read it once. Then again. Then he set it flat on the table and pressed both hands on top of it and looked at me. His eyes were wet. Not the wall-staring red from a year ago, not the desperate kind, the grateful kind, the kind that means something good has happened and the person feeling it understands exactly what it cost. "Dad, you did that," I said. "I handed you a property before. This time you earned one. There's a difference, and you know what the difference feels like now." He nodded, couldn't speak for a moment. "There's one more thing in the folder," I said. "Back page." He turned to the back page. A photograph. Small. Taken at one of Nathan's neighborhood dinners a few years ago. A photo I hadn't known existed until Nathan found it in his phone last month and texted it to me without comment. Nora Walker, sitting at a table laughing at something someone had said off camera. She looked like herself. Sharp. Present. Completely. Permanently alive in that moment the camera caught. I'd had it printed for him. On the back. In my handwriting. I'd copied the last 2 lines of her letter. "Easy love leaves men empty. The hard kind is the only kind worth inheriting." Derek held the photograph for a long time. Then he looked up at me, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, longer than the dinner, longer than the 4 difficult years before it, longer than the gradual drift that had brought 2 people who loved each other to a table where something unforgivable had happened. My son looked at me like I was his father, not his bank, not his safety net, not the man at the other end of a phone call with a number he needed. His father. I stood up, extended my hand. He stood up, too. And then he did something he hadn't done since he was about 9 years old, standing in a hospital hallway after I'd had a minor procedure, and he'd been terrified in a way he didn't have the vocabulary for yet. He hugged me. Not a performance hug, not the kind you give at the end of a dinner because it's the socially appropriate punctuation. The real kind. The kind that has weight in it. I put my arms around my son, and I thought about Nora Walker in a hospital bed in Evanston, with an oxygen tube she kept trying to remove, telling me there was no middle ground, and that I was the last one to admit it. She had been right. She had been right about everything. Ryan Baker called me the following Monday. "I reviewed the transfer documents," he said. "Everything is clean. Effective immediately." A pause. "You know, Most people don't get to see if the gamble pays off this fast. It's not a gamble if you know your kid, I said. You didn't know him a year ago. No, I said. I knew who he could be. That's different. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Nora would have liked how this turned out. She knew how it would turn out, I said. She just needed me to catch up. Nathan came over that evening with tamales. Of course he did. And we sat on the back porch while the April light went golden and long across the yard. How'd it go? Nathan asked. He earned it, I said. Nathan nodded slowly, sipped his beer. Nora would say something wise right now, he said. She'd say she told me so, I said. And she'd be right. Nathan laughed. I laughed. And somewhere in that particular evening light, with the tamales going cold because neither of us was in a hurry, and the sound of the neighborhood doing its ordinary suburban things around us, I felt her, not dramatically, not as a vision or a voice, just as a presence, warm and sharp-eyed and faintly amused, the way Nora Walker was always faintly amused by the things that turned out the way she'd said they would. I told you so, Paul. Yes, Nora, you did. Derek Herman manages 4 properties now. His own. 3 of mine under a formal management agreement that Ryan Baker drew up and that Derek negotiated. Actually negotiated line by line, knowing exactly what he was worth and that he considers earned. The F-150 with the dented passenger door got replaced last fall with a newer model. He kept the dent story. Tells it to clients when he wants them to understand he's a man who knows the difference between what something costs and what it's worth. He calls me every Sunday, not with numbers, just to talk. Last Sunday, he called to tell me about a new tenant at Birchwood, a young woman, first apartment, nervous about the lease, asking a lot of questions. Derek had sat with her for an hour going through every line. She reminded me of myself, he said. The old version. The one who signed things without reading them. What did you tell her? I told her to read everything. That the important stuff is always in the parts people skip. I smiled at my kitchen window. That's good advice. I had a good teacher, he said. I stood there after he hung up, coffee in hand, Naperville morning doing its slow suburban stretch outside the window. Sprinklers, dog walkers, a teenager on a bike who looked personally offended by the existence of hills. Perfectly ordinary Sunday. The best kind. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories on sweet family revenge. And as always, thank you genuinely for being part of this family. I stood there after he hung up, coffee in hand. Naperville morning doing its slow suburban stretch outside the window. Sprinklers clicked methodically across freshly cut lawns. Dog walkers exchanged quiet waves they had probably exchanged every Sunday for years. A teenager pedaled reluctantly up a gentle hill, looking personally offended that gravity expected anything from him before noon. Somewhere down the block, a garage door rolled open, followed by the familiar sound of someone deciding it was finally time to wash the car. Perfectly ordinary Sunday. The best kind. It took me a long time to understand that peace doesn't usually announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or dramatic declarations. More often, it slips quietly into your life disguised as routine. You make coffee without checking your phone every 30 seconds. You sit by the window because you enjoy the view instead of because you're waiting for bad news. You answer a call from someone you love, and when the conversation ends, you smile without realizing you've been smiling the whole time. That's when you know you've arrived somewhere worth staying. There was a time when every quiet morning made me nervous. Silence felt temporary, like the pause before another argument or another unexpected problem demanding immediate attention. I had grown so accustomed to living in reaction that I almost forgot what it felt like to simply exist. Recovery, I've learned, isn't the moment the crisis ends. Recovery is the morning months later, when you realize you haven't thought about the crisis at all. Life has quietly reclaimed the space it used to occupy. Looking out that kitchen window, I thought about how many ordinary Sundays I'd spent chasing things that no longer mattered. Promotions that looked important at the time, arguments that seemed worth winning, opinions from people whose approval I no longer needed. Funny how distance simplifies everything. The older I get, the shorter the list becomes. Good health, honest work, people who call because they genuinely want to hear your voice, a home where peace feels natural instead of surprising. Beyond that, the details don't seem nearly as urgent as they once did. The phone call had lasted less than 20 minutes, yet it somehow confirmed everything I had spent years hoping was possible. Relationships don't become healthy because of one perfect conversation. They become healthy because ordinary conversations stop feeling difficult. You stop rehearsing your words before dialing the number. You stop wondering how every sentence will be interpreted. You stop carrying yesterday into today. Trust returns quietly, one uncomplicated Sunday at a time, until eventually it becomes the new normal. That's the part no one tells you. Healing isn't exciting. It's wonderfully repetitive. It's coffee every morning, calls every Sunday, birthdays remembered, holidays that no longer require emotional armor before you walk through the front door. Those routines may not make dramatic stories, but they're exactly what broken families spend years hoping to recover. Standing there with my coffee growing cold again, I realized I wouldn't have traded that perfectly ordinary morning for any extraordinary success I'd once imagined, because success eventually becomes another memory. Peace becomes a way of living. And if there's a difference between the two, I'll choose peace every single time, if this story leaves you with anything. I hope it's this: don't overlook the ordinary moments. They're easy to ignore while you're waiting for something bigger. But one day, you'll look back and realize they were the life you were working so hard to build all along. The sprinklers will keep turning. The dogs will keep getting walked. Teenagers will continue believing hills are a personal insult. And if you're lucky, you'll be standing by the window with a cup of coffee, smiling at a Sunday morning that no longer needs to prove anything. That's enough. More than enough. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories on sweet family revenge. And as always, thank you, genuinely, for being part of this family.